Kyle, I would love for you to give us a bit of a history lesson here. So can you talk to us about the origins of the presidential salary? Let's start with George Washington.
Yeah, I was a history major, so this is my bread and butter here. I was super excited writing this story. So when the framers were putting together the Constitution, they disagreed on a lot of stuff, but they ultimately came to the conclusion that the president should not be like a king. They decided the president should be compensated for their work, but should not be, getting all of the money in the world, right? That said, Alexander Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers, which were written to defend the Constitution and advocate for its ratification, he advocated for the president to be paid at least reasonably well. And the reason why is a poorly paid president might be more susceptible to corruption. If you have somebody who's only making the equivalent of a farmer's salary, for example, or a blacksmith's wage, maybe they will be more susceptible to bribes and gifts and that kind of thing. So Congress passed in 1789, when George Washington became president, Congress awarded him a salary of $25,000, which doesn't sound like much, but at the time was worth over $600,000 in today's money. So pretty well compensated guy. Now, George Washington, of course, plantation owner, was plenty wealthy himself. He didn't really need the salary. He probably wouldn't have been too susceptible to bribery anyway, but nonetheless, that was sort of the precedent that was set going forward.
So the precedent set, you need to have a president paid reasonably well, but obviously there are factors like wars and financial disasters like the Great Depression, as well as the recession. So how has this impacted the worth of the presidential salary?
Yeah, so when we look at history, we see that the presidential salary's value in inflation-adjusted terms, in today's money, swings up and down wildly. The chart, it looks like a mountain with big gaps and caverns and all sorts of stuff. That's despite the fact that the actual nominal value of the president's salary has only been adjusted upwards a couple of times. It's only been adjusted upwards 5 times over the course of the history of the United States. So, for example, early on in our history, we had the War of 1812. The British burned down the White House. They were blockading the coast, which made it impossible for the U.S. to import goods. That raises the price of everything. That's a lot of inflation, right? That caused the value of the president's salary in today's terms to plummet. So James Madison, I think it was James Madison, if I'm remembering correctly, was making less than $400,000 in today's dollars. Even though he's making that same $25,000 salary, the inflation-adjusted value dropped. Same thing during the Civil War. The federal government was printing lots of money to try to fund its, all of the things it needed for the war effort. And Lincoln's salary lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in inflation-adjusted value just over his 4 to 5 years in office between 1861 and 1865. So these big events really do show up in the historical record when we're looking at the historical salaries. And the other thing I'll say is the U.S. economy used to be much more unstable. You had these big swings of inflation and deflation, and you had kind of rapid depressions and rapid recessions that would then switch over, and all of a sudden you'd have rapid growth the next year. It was a much more unstable economy, especially in like the 1800s. And so that also causes these big swings that we're talking about.